Looking for a way to support the channel? Check out the official MTG Goldfish playmats like Fatal Scoops at mtggoldfishmerch.com/YouTube. Use the coupon code YouTube for 5% off. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for a very surprising video. So today, I'm going to warn you right now, first thing, before we do anything else, we're going to be talking about some leaked cards. So if you are trying to avoid leaks, turn off the video, I won't be mad at you, no worries. I know leaks are not something everyone wants to talk about, but if you're interested in talking about some Theros Beyond Death cards that came really out of nowhere, in a very surprising, weird way, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So here's the story, basically. As best as I could tell, and as much as I've researched this, I actually think it's true. I was skeptical at first, but I'm actually very convinced this is what happened. So basically, someone in, I think it was North Carolina, went into their local Walgreens, and they were walking through the Magic card stuff. They happened to see 5 or 6 packs of Theros Beyond Death on the shelves of their local Walgreens. So they're like, I don't think that's supposed to come out for another couple months. I should probably buy these. They bought the packs from their Walgreens. They opened them up and saw the cards, took some pictures of them. So we have these weird, like 6 packs worth of leaks of Theros cards, which means we don't have very complete information, but we do have some interesting cards to talk about, and that's going to be our topic for today. And another warning, well, first off, another leak warning. These are leak cards. If you're waiting for official spoiler season, Theros doesn't come out until January, so it's still a little bit away. Like I said, no hard feelings if you don't want to see leaks. Go ahead, turn off the video, watch the Instant Deck Tech or Budget Magic or whatever. Perfectly fine with that. The other thing is, because this is such a weird leak, and because our standard metagame is so influenced by Oko right now, we're not going to go super deep on, like, this card is going to do this in a specific standard deck. We'll talk about synergies and stuff a little bit, but really mostly going to show off the cards. But until we know more about Theros Beyond Death itself and what other support pieces we're getting, because it seems like a pretty synergistic base set, and until we see what happens with Oko and bannings and metagame developing, there's just not a ton of sense in being like, I'm going to start brewing Theros standard decks right away. There's just so much that's going to change in the next couple of months. But anyway, a quick reminder before we break down some sweet new leaked Theros Beyond Death cards. If you enjoyed the video, it would be awesome of you if you could take a second, click that subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's talk Theros Beyond Death, starting with probably one of the most chased cards from the set, one of the face cards of the set, Elspeth Some Nemesis, and I gotta say, I cannot believe the person who got these packs luck to find 5 or 6 random packs at Walgreens, to open 5 or 6 random packs, and not only get a Planeswalker, but get the face Planeswalker, and not only get the face Planeswalker, but get it in the full art extended, like, collector booster style. Like, how insanely lucky is that? But Elspeth Some Nemesis, 4 mana, 5 loyalty, -1, up to 2 target creatures you control each get +2/+1 until end of turn, -2. You make 2 1/1 white human soldiers, -3, you gain 5 life. You're probably wondering why all these negative abilities, and that's because Elspeth has a new mechanic on it, Escape, and I think this mechanic's very powerful. So the Escape cost on Elspeth is 6 mana. You have to exile 4 other cards from your graveyard, and you can cast Elspeth for its escape cost from the graveyard, which is really insane. This is a Planeswalker that, unless your opponent has a Leyline of the Void or something, it's going to keep coming back. So even though it's all minus abilities, you don't really mind Elspeth running out of loyalty, because then you cast it again, start back at 5 loyalty. That's how you increase the loyalty of Elspeth, is by casting it again from your graveyard with the escape cost. So Elspeth, it doesn't jump off the page as a busted Planeswalker. If you look at the abilities, the -1 is kind of like Symbiosis, I guess. It's not quite, it's +2/+1 instead of +2/+2, but still similar, a double pump for 2 creatures. The -2, like a Raise the Alarm type effect. The ultimate, quote-unquote, -3 is White Sun's Passage, gain 5 life. None of those are super powerful effects, but they all do generate value, and I think Elspeth, at first glance, it seems like a kind of Planeswalker you're going to want to play in an an aggressive style deck. Maybe something like Selesnya Adventures, mono white aggro that can really take advantage of the double pump ability. If you have a couple of evasive creatures and you're giving them +2/+1 a couple of turns in a row, that is a lot of damage really quickly. Another possibility would be like a token style deck where the -2 would be right at home, letting you go wide. So I feel like you want to be mostly aggressive with Elspeth. Not really excited about it in a control deck, although I guess like the life gain is fine. But I think the real payoff for Elspeth is the escape ability. When you read Elspeth, you gotta read all those abilities in the context of being able to cast this repeatedly from your graveyard. Because honestly, if you just read the abilities, it doesn't seem broken. It seems fine, it seems decent, but it doesn't seem insane. But when you consider how hard it's gonna be to get rid of Elspeth forever, and the fact that you can kind of use it like weird card advantage if you mill it over with a Merfolk Secret Keeper, or maybe surveil it with Thought Erasure, or Emery to mill over a bunch of cards, you're just getting this free value from your graveyard. That is what makes Elspeth really, really strong. It's not so much that any individual ability, or even the combination of abilities, are like, oh my goodness, that's so busted. It's more that it keeps coming back, and it keeps escaping, it keeps returning. That, I think, is what makes Elspeth Sun's Nemesis powerful. So I think this card is going to be better than it looks, primarily because I think Escape is going to be a very strong ability. Just having this Planeswalker sitting in your graveyard to come back in the late game is a really powerful effect. So that's Elspeth Sun's Nemesis. Excited to see how it actually plays in Standard. We also got Delicos, Crafter of Wonders, a new legend, Merfolk Artificer, 3 mana, 2/4. You can tap it to make 2 mana, but you can only spend it on artifact spells or the activated abilities of artifacts. And then equip creatures you control have flying and haste. So Delicos, definitely a sweet commander card. If you're playing blue-red artifacts in Commander, in Brawl, whatever, gonna be sweet there. Adding 2 mana, that's a very powerful mana dork. In Standard, the question is, what do you do with Delicos? So if you play Delicos on turn 3, you make your land drop on turn 4, you're going to untap with 6 mana. So what artifact can you cast for 6 mana? And the answer is, there's not a ton. I guess we have God Pharaoh statue. That's kind of sweet. Tome of the Guild pack. There's also some powerful stuff like Bolas's Citadel, the Great Henge, the Cauldron of Eternity, but those are really clunky color-wise. You're playing like an Izzet 3 mana legend and then trying to play like a triple black or double green spell. So at first glance, when you see Delicos, you're like, what do you do with this in Standard? And it might be that we just haven't seen the support pieces yet, because like I said in the intro, we haven't seen much of Theros Beyond Death, so maybe we'll get more support pieces in the future that'll make it look way, way stronger. But then, the more I think about Delicos, I don't think you necessarily want to play this in an artifact ramp deck. If you really read the entire card, I think that what Delicos is kind of like this equipment card. Obviously, it kind of hints at that with equip creatures you control having flying and haste, but it also works with the activated abilities of artifact mana. So Delicos, for example, can ramp you into Embercleave and then can help you equip Embercleave or Colossus Hammer. It can allow you to equip Colossus Hammer for much, much cheaper, adding that mana to reduce the equip cost. So I think maybe, even though this looks like some weird artifact ramp card, maybe this is actually a support piece for some sort of like, is it artifact beatdown? We have cards like Fervent Champion, really good for the equipment plan. We even have like Nahiri Storm of Stone, which also works with the theme in the right colors. So I think maybe that's the direction to go with Delicos in Standard. So I think immediately seems sweet for artifact-based commander decks in the blue and red colors, which is kind of like a theme, a recurring theme of blue and red in Commander. Seems really sweet there. And in Standard, maybe it can lead to some weird equipment type deck. Fingers crossed we get more powerful equipment in Theros. That's the biggest stumbling block right now, is beyond Embercleave and like sort of Colossus Hammer, despite its really high equip cost, we don't have that many busted equipment in the format, but maybe we'll get more in Theros itself. Next up, we got Treacherous Bliss, and this kind of leads us into Enchantment Land. And one of the criticisms was original Theros is people said it didn't feel like an enchantment set. It was billed as an enchantment set, and while there were a ton of enchantments in the set, there was a lot of like enchantment creatures. We didn't have a ton of just traditional enchantments, and wizards, if you look through just the leaked cards that we've got so far, they have definitely went very far to fix that with Theros Beyond Death. So Treacherous Blessing, 3 mana enchantment. When it comes into play, you draw 3 cards. Whenever you cast a spell, you lose a life, and then when it comes to target of a spell or of ability, you sacrifice it. So really, this is essentially like a Painful Truce, except you're not paying the life up front. Painful Truce, it was played pretty heavily in Standard, just a draw 3 for 3 in black. Treacherous Blessing, draw 3 for 3 in black. The thing with Treacherous Blessing is, instead of losing 3 life right away, you're kind of taking that damage slowly as you cast more spells. So the question's going to be, how do you get rid of Treacherous Blessing? What you really want with Treacherous Blessing is the ability to play it, and then the ability to sacrifice it, and then maybe even like reanimate it with Starfield and next draw more cards. In Standard, there's not a ton of incidental ways to deal with Treacherous Blessing. Really, looking through all the cards we currently have, Kiora was the only one that kind of stuck out. Technically, you can untap your Treacherous Blessing to force yourself to sack it, but really, you could like bounce it maybe with Callous Dismissal, although remember it's going to sacrifice itself. You could disenchant it, so there are some ways of getting rid of it. So I think immediately it seems fine and probably very good in a black aggro deck. If you're playing black aggro, drawing 3 for 3 is great, and you don't really care about losing a bit of life because you're planning on using those 3 cards to kill your opponent quickly. On the other hand, in a more control style deck, I don't know if you can afford to play Treacherous Blessing unless you find a way to target it and get rid of it, because in a long game, that damage is going to add up. If you can kill your opponent quickly, it's just better than Painful Truce, but if the game is going to go on for 5 or 10 turns and you're going to cast a bunch of spells, eventually you are going to kill yourself with your own Treacherous Blessing. Speaking of enchantments that work like spells, good lord, you will see as we go along, enchantments with flash is sort of like a big theme that we've seen so far. So Ashiok's Erasure, 4 mana enchantment with flash, so you can cast it as an instant. When it enters a battlefield, exile target spell. Your opponent can't cast cards with the same name as the exiled spell, and then when it leaves the battlefield, you return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So this is essentially a counterspell version of Exclusion Ritual or Vanishing Light, Oblivion Ring. Basically, you cast this as a counterspell for 4 mana. You exile the spell from the stack, and then your opponent can't cast more of those, but then when you lose your Ashiok's Erasure, the spell's going to go back to its opponent's hand. So really think of it like a 4 mana counterspell with upside, but then with the downside that if your opponent can deal with it in enchantment form, they're going to get their spell back. But I think that's still a pretty interesting card. There are some sneaky things to do with it, like if you are able to exile maybe a kind of okay spell in the early game, you could use Teferi Time Twist to blink it, to then exile another spell in the future. You could use Teferi Time Raveler to bounce it back to your hand. And one of the things I really like about Ashiok's Erasure, compared to some of the white cards we were talking about, like the Oblivion Rings, the Exclusion Ritual, when Erasure leaves the battlefield, the card of your opponent is going back to their hand. They don't get to cast it right away like Spell Queller. So let's say you, I don't know, hit some big 5 or 6 mana spell with this. Your opponent, sure, if they can deal with Ashiok's Erasure, it's going to go back to their hand, but then they're going to have to spend 5 or 6 mana again to recast it. So it has some nice tempo implications. And compared to an Oblivion Ring, where if your opponent kills it, they just immediately get back their thing and you get punished really hard, there's a little bit of protection with Ashiok's Erasure because your opponent's going to have to re-spend the mana to cast a card from their hand again. So a really neat way to make enchantments matter, and enchantments work like spells, and we'll see this again and again through our leaks that we're talking about. There's a lot of enchantments that actually act more like spells than traditional enchantments, although they also have some enchantment-ness, if that's a word, built in, like the not being able to cast additional copies on Ashiok's Erasure. That is a very enchantment ability. We've seen it before with Exclusion Ritual and other spells, so it's kind of like a spell, but also an enchantment mixed in as well. We also got Labyrinth of Skofos. Let's go with Skofos. That's probably as good as it's going to get. And Labyrinth is a land that taps for mana, and then you can pay 4, tap it to remove an attacking or blocking creature from combat. This is very similar to Mystifying Maze. Mystifying Maze, kind of the same ability, only hit attacking creatures and only your opponent's creatures, but it actually exiled and returned the creature. So if you do this to a creature with an enter the battlefield trigger, it's kind of bad because you're letting your opponent reuse it. So Labyrinth is a big upgrade over Mystifying Maze. You can hit your own stuff, you can hit blocking creatures to like block with a little creature and then blink it to save it from dying, and then remove it from combat to save it from dying. So it's a little bit like a Mazavith as well. It works the same, except it's not free. You got to spend 4 mana plus tapping it to activate it. So it's going to be interesting to see where Labyrinth falls on the competitive scale. I could certainly imagine playing it in Commander decks. In Standard, Mystifying Maze did see a little bit of play. Labyrinth is a pretty strict upgrade over Mystifying Maze, so maybe it's actually going to have a shot in the format. Super cool land, at least. Next on our list, we got the lands, the basic lands from Theros Beyond Death, and they're very close to something I've been asking about for a long time, which is no art lands. And while no art might be a bit of exaggeration, there is a bit of art here. It basically is. They're just like the mana symbol with the swirly Nick sky behind it. These lands are so super cool. Oh man, I love these lands. We've seen so many full art lands that it's kind of nice to see a different take. And while they're kind of full art-esque, this is really unique. We have never seen lands like this in the history of Magic. Yes, we may have seen them in the history of like Yu-Gi-Oh! They look a little Yu-Gi-Oh-ish, but still, these lands are super cool. Very excited to see Wizards trying some different things. Getting a little tired of full art lands. We get full art lands so much these days that I love that Wizards is taking a bit of a chance in trying different lands, and I definitely will love playing these lands, and they're probably going to look amazing in foil as well. We also got a couple of good reprints. Vanishing Light, oddly, our fixed version of Oblivion Ring, hasn't been in standard for a while. We have Prison Realm. Vanishing Light, basically an upgrade, hits any non-land permanent. For 3 mana, that is a really good deal. Hitting Planeswalkers, hitting all these enchantments that are coming, artifacts, creatures, whatever you need to get rid of. And then Underworld Dreams, downgraded to uncommon for the first time. Whenever your opponent draws a card, it deals 1 damage to that player. So this is sweet with kind of like build around, works with uncommon Obnixilis, and super sweet to see it as an uncommon. We also got the return of Sagas, and Sagas, I gotta say, they seem dead on flavor-wise for a set like Theros with the enchantment base. The Crow in War, Manami Is Prophecy, 2 different Sagas we've seen so far, 1 rare, 1 uncommon. The Crow in War, pretty interesting card. When it comes into play, you gain control of a creature for as long as you control the Crow in War. Then the next turn, all of your opponent's creatures, they have to attack. Then when you get the last lore counter, each tapped creature deals damage to itself equal to its power. So this is kind of like a really good threat in effect, where you're actually gaining control of the creature for multiple turns until the Crow in War goes away, which makes it a little bit like active aggression. In a 2-player game, you play the Crow in War, you steal your opponent's best creature, your opponent's gotta attack you the next turn, so in theory you can block your opponent's attacker with their own creature, have them both die, get a 2-for-1 out of it, and then the last mode, it's a little bit weird, but kind of Solar Blaze-y, where your opponent's gonna have to attack you, so all their creatures are gonna be tapped, and then the last lore counter triggers, hopefully wipes out your opponent's entire board. Hopefully you can leave your creatures untapped, not get hurt by it. Of course, it's a little bit dependent on power and toughness. If your opponent's playing a lot of high toughness, low power creatures, not going to do as much work, but we saw Solar Blaze show up a little bit as an answer to like all the zombie tokens from Field of the Dead. So in the right metagame, I think the Crow in War can be very strong. It's probably literally busted in Limited and has a chance to see standard play as well. Manami Is Prophecy, on the other hand, this is our first saga with 4 lower counters, and the end result is you basically get a really convoluted Glimmer of Genius, I think, for 2 mana. So, comes into play for 2 mana, you get to scry 2. The next turn, you get to name a card. The turn after that, when you cast a spell with the card that you named with the lore counter before, you get to draw 2 cards. Only the first time, though, so you can't, like, chain them together and store them off. And then the last lore counter, you get to peek at the top card of each player's library. So I think this is actually pretty powerful. It is slow, but when you think about how it works, you play this on turn 2. Turn 3, you name a card that you know you're going to be casting the next turn. Turn 4, you cast that card. You draw 2 cards. So you ended up scrying 2 and drawing 2 and getting a little extra value with the peak at the end, which kind of makes it into a Glimmer of Genius that you trade time for mana, essentially. Almost like the suspend cards in Modern. You're getting a very similar effect to Glimmer of Genius, but instead of paying 4 mana, you're paying a couple of extra turns, but really when it comes down to it, you're going to get the cards by turn 4 anyway. So I actually think Manami Is Prophecy probably has a decent shot to see play in Standard. We'll see how much enchantment removals running around. That would be my one concern, but this seems like a pretty reasonable card as a weird enchantment-based cantrip in the format. We also got the return of Enchantment Creatures, as exemplified by Dreamstalker Manticore, Hero of the Nyx board, Dreamshaper Shaman. So these cards, if you didn't play original Theros, they're creatures, they're also enchantments. Upside is they do enchantment-y things, most of them, like Dreamstruck or Manticore. Whenever you cast your first spell during opponent's turn, you get to ping something, kind of an enchantment-esque ability. But the downside is they do that in enchantment removal along with creature removal. None of these jump off the page as being super broken. Hero of the Nyxborn seems like it could be alright. For 3 mana, you get a 2/2 and a 1/1 token, and then when you cast a spell that targets it, you pump all of your creatures +0/+1. It doesn't look like Heroic is actually returning in Theros, but we have a lot of non-keyworded Heroic cards. Like Hero of Nyxborn, the last ability, it's essentially a Heroic spell. It's just not keyworded as Heroic. And then Dreamshaper Shaman, a little expensive for competitive play, but seems fun for casual formats like Commander or Brawl. Being near end step, you can pay 3, sack a non-land, reveal cards from the top of your library to reveal a non-land, and put that card onto the battlefield and the rest in random order. It's a little hard to build around, but if you could get it right, you could kind of use this as like a repeatable polymorph type effect, where you're sacking some lowly token and then revealing massive, huge creatures off the top of your deck. So a really fun card at the very least. We also got, as I mentioned, a ton more spell-like enchantments. The Omen cycle, Omen of the Sea, Omen of the Dead, Omen of the Hunt, Minions Return. These are all essentially cheap spells that are actually enchantments. Omen of the Sea, for example, 2 mana, enters the battlefield, scry 2, draw a card. So with 2 mana, Serum Visions essentially, but you can also pay 2 in a blue, sacrifice it to scry 2. Omen of the Dead is a raised dead. 1 mana flash, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand when it enters the battlefield. Then you can sack it to scry Omen of the Hunt, a rampant growth, 3 mana rampant growth with flash, and then Minions Return, kind of just a more typical aura-based enchantment, but you can flash it in for extra value. I really love how Wizards, so far, in the little bit of Theros that we've seen, has attacked the design of these enchantments. Yes, there probably will be some complaints that they feel a little bit spell-like, but I think it's really sweet. It's a way that you can have a ton of enchantments in a set, but still have your spells. Like Omen of the Dead, it's just going to be a raised dead. It's the same as a card we've seen a million times before, but this gives it a twist, being an enchantment, having a little bit enchantment value with the paying 3 and sacrificing it to scry. So I think this is a really sweet cycle in a really cunning way by Wizards to fit more enchantments in the set. As far as what they do in Standard, I think we're mostly in wait-and-see mode. We do have a few payoffs for playing a bunch of enchantments right now. Allay Artful, Provocateur, Dance of the Man, Starfield Mystic, All That Glitters. We have a few, but I expect that we'll see a lot more once we get through the rest of Theros, because right now, in all honesty, there's not a huge upside to playing an enchantment spell over a real spell. So I think we'll have to wait and see, but I'm expecting we'll get a ton more Enchantments Matter support in Theros to make these enchantments, well, technically enchantments, the enchantments that work like spells, a little bit better than playing a normal spell version of them. Otherwise, we got another carry added, a 2 mana 1/1, taps for mana of any color if you have a big creature, power 4 greater, taps for 2 mana of any color instead. Basically, a Sylvan carry added that trades protection and toughness for the ability to sometimes be a Leafkin Druid, where you tap for 2 mana, except mana of any color, which is kind of nice. Elarios Enraptured. Oh, this card, I don't think it's great, but it's very unique. 3 mana, you get a 2/3. It comes into play tapped. It doesn't untap during your untapped step if you control Reflection, but when it comes into play, you make a 3/2 Reflection token. So basically, in theory, you're getting 5 power and toughness across 2 bodies when you cast this, except your actual legend doesn't untap itself until the Reflection dies. What I mostly want to do with this is play it with Yarok. If you play this with Yarok, you're getting 2 3/2s for 3 mana. That is a lot of Yarok value, and makes Elaros really sweet. Also seems like a really good card to use with Vanifar, since you can play this, get the Reflection, sacrifice it, get a 4-drop, you have your Reflection still. So I think while this is a very strange card, I love the synergy of it. We also just got a ton of lower rarity stuff. Some of it's kind of interesting. Warden of the Chains in the middle. It's big. A 4/4 for 3 with Trample's nice. You need another 4 power creature to make it work. Chainweb Arachner, kind of a nice Cruel Harpooner type creature. A 1 mana 1/2 spider with reach. When it comes into play, deals damage equal to its power to target creature with flying and opponent controls, and then you can escape it for 5 mana, and it comes back into play with 3 +1/+1 counters. So a 1-drop that a little bit later in the game is going to come back as a 4/5 with reach and fight another flyer. So I think that's one to keep an eye out on. Could be a good sideboard card for Standard. Thundering Chariot, more vehicles, Probably not good enough for Constructed. A bunch of other lower rarity stuff. Furious Rise seems like a sweet commander card. 3 mana being your end step. If you control a creature power 4 or greater, you can exile the top card of your library, and you can play that card until you exile another card with Furious Rise. So end step you exile, your next turn you can cast that card. Then the next end step, you're going to exile another card, do it again, do it again, do it again. So as long as you're playing like a big creature deck in Commander, this seems like a great red source of card advantage. You're just drawing an extra card each turn. You gotta wait a little bit to use it, but still, exactly what a Gruul style Commander deck is gonna be looking for. And those, my goodness, have been our daily Theros Beyond Death leaked, very early spoilers. So let me know what you think. I mean, we were not expecting information on Theros Beyond Death for another month or two, so this really comes out by surprise. But now that we get this early glimpse into the set, what do you think about Elspeth? How good is that card? What do you think about the mechanics? How good is escaping stuff from the graveyard? Is that going to be super powerful or just kind of okay? What about Delagos? Are we going to have a deck that can take advantage of that with enough artifacts, with enough equipments? The enchantment-based spells, Treacherous Blessings, and Ashnod's Erasure, all the lower rarity like Raise Dead type stuff, the Omen cycle. How good are those cards going to be? What do you think of just the idea of having enchantments with flash that kind of work like instants but are technically enchantments? What do you think about that? All the other lower rarity stuff, what are you most excited for? How about the no art basic lands? How hyped are you for those? The return of sagas? Let me know what you think about all this stuff in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.